fellow travelers. Welcome to an extra level of the RPG Cave. I'm one of your hosts, the level 99 human archmage, Ryan Turford, and I'm joined by the first time in a fortnight by the level 99 gnome barbarian, Mr. Matt Sawinski. Matt, how are you doing on this lovely Sunday evening?
I'm doing swell. I'm ready to talk some video games. One of my favorite series. New entry. Let's do it, Ryan.
Nice. And we are once again joined by the level 99 human warlock, Mr. Kevin Ainsworth. Kevin, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I've been looking forward to talking with you fine gentlemen for like a week now. Just super excited to get into this discussion.
Yeah, for sure. So today's discussion's all about The Legend of Heroes Trails from Zero. We're doing a full reviews discussion. First of all, before we get into it, a huge thank you to our friends over at NIS, who provided us review codes to review the game. The game is out next week, by the way, on September 27th. So don't forget to mark our calendars and check the game out next week. But I think we have a lot to say about this one. So first off, I kind of want to get everyone's gauge on like where everyone's history is with the Legend of Heroes series, because I know we're kind of all in different places on this one. So Kevin, I'm going to start with you. Where are you with this series?
This was my very first Trails game. So I've never played a Legend of Heroes game before. This is the first time diving in. So I had no idea what to expect. I've heard good things because I know Matt likes them. And I know Mr. Matty Plays, another content creator I listen to. He really is high on them. He's been playing the whole series. So I went in, I was like, oh, this is going to be so good. So this is my first one. And we'll discuss my thoughts more. But yep, first time.
Nice. Yeah, actually, before I go to you, Matt, I'm in the same boat as Kevin. This was also my first time playing one of these games. Now, I mean, I've picked them up before because I've tried to jump into, Trails of Cold Steel multiple times, and it's just never clicked with me, despite the fact that people, keep telling me how much they love that game. So I thought, this would be a good opportunity for me to jump into something that almost felt like it would probably be more of a one-off thing, even though it sounds like it ties into a lot of the other main story stuff from other games. It sounds like maybe it might be a good jumping in point, but of course, Matt, what's your history with the series?
Yeah, so I picked up Trails of Cold Steel initially back on the Vita. Vita lives, Vita forever. After playing Persona 4 and 3, and I was just like, oh no, I want more of this kind of thing. So I heard about Cold Steel. It just came out at the time. Hopped into it, and I've ended up playing through Cold Steel 1, Cold Steel 2, Cold Steel 3. I have Cold Steel 4 downloaded and ready to go. I've played through both Trails in the Sky Part 1. I started Part 2 and then got just sidelined by something else, but I every intent to go back to it. And then of course now playing through Trails from Zero. So I've played a lot of the different things. And for anybody who's like unawares, like the way that the games like differentiate and connect is basically each one of them takes place in a different geographical location on the same continent. So Cold Steel happens in one area, Trails in the Sky happens in one area, and now we finally get Zero, which happens in a different area, and all these things come together down the road.
Yeah, they all like kind of link together in a way. It's almost like one big RPG that just happens to have a million different pieces, kind of like the One Piece from One Piece, like that. So there you go. So just a little bit of history about Trails from Zero specifically. It originally launched in Japan on the PSP in 2010, and then it came to PCs in China in 2011, and then PlayStation Vita in Japan only in 2012. This is the very first time the game has gotten an English translation at all, let alone releasing anywhere besides Japan and China, because the EU didn't even get that. A lot of times, like if there's a Japanese only release, sometimes they'll come to European countries as well. Like they'll maybe localize it in German or something like that, but that didn't happen for this game either. So this is the first time anyone outside of Japan is getting access to this. And for the most part, we kind of knew going into this as well. And we'll just state this fact at this like upfront as well, that this is pretty much a port as is of the PSP game with the translation. They came out and were very forthright about the fact that there wasn't really going to be a ton of new additions. This is almost just treated like a slightly remastered port of the PSP game. So just FYI, going into this game, of course. The price, of course, $49.99 Canadian dollars. I wanted to note that because, again, since it is such a port of a PSP game, we do have it basis of that to compare it to now that we have PlayStation Portable games coming to PSN. So we'll talk about that more. I'll talk about that more for sure in the outro as to kind of my final thoughts on the game and how that factors into it as well. Because, it's one of those things where we don't really live in a bubble with PSP releases anymore. So we do have more of a comparison point. So I want to talk about that a little bit later. But the other thing I want to mention as well before we get into this is the platform we're playing on, which I didn't realize going into this how important that might be. But I feel like we need to state this up front. So Kevin, where'd you play the game?
I played it on PlayStation 5, so the PlayStation 4 version.
Nice. Matt, where'd you play?
Steam Deck.
So you got that PC version on Steam Deck. I'm like Kevin, I also played it on PlayStation 5/PlayStation 4, which again, I wasn't expecting going into it that there'd be, differences between the versions, but we'll talk about those in a little bit because we'll be able to do some comparing and contrasting. But without further ado, I think it's time for us to start talking about the story. This is going to be a spoiler-free review, so we're not going to do anything spoilery, but I'm going to give a quick story synopsis. So if you don't want to know anything about the story at all, skip ahead about 30 seconds while I give you my paragraph-long story synopsis. So the game takes place 3 months after the end of Trails in the Sky 3. Lloyd Bannings, a detective fresh from detective school, joins a special division of the police force in his hometown called the Special Support Section. It's up to him and his 3 co-workers, Ellie, Randy, and Tio, to take on requests from the locals to help rebuild faith in the police force, which is kind of like gone downhill over the time that Lloyd has kind of left town, and to help them compete with their rivals, the Bracers, which is almost like this other group that takes on requests in town to stop all kinds of crimes and monsters and stuff like that. So what did you think overall about the story in this game? Also, I forgot to mention as well, Matt, you and I both haven't finished this game at the time of this review, and Kevin has. And I think we're about at the same point too, because I'm like towards the end of chapter 3.
I'm just getting into chapter 3, so I'd probably say I'm probably around halfway through the game, and yours probably getting towards that 60 to 65% mark, I would guess.
Yeah, probably. But Matt, I'll start with you. What do you think about the story so far from what we've played?
I know a bunch of these characters. So like Randy, for example, is in Trails of Cold Steel 3. There's a lot of crossover. Estelle and Joshua are the main characters of Trails in the Sky. So there's a lot of crossover here for me. So me coming into this, I knew exactly what I was going into because this has been a fundamental missing piece of the giant puzzle for me for years now. It's a game that a lot of people have been crying out for a very, very long time. So going into it, I knew exactly what I was expecting. I wanted more backstory on these characters. I obviously know certain plot points that will be covered in the back half of this game and in its sequel. So for me, like I said, I knew what I was going into and I'm having a blast with it. I love the characters. I love the direction that the story is heading. And I like it just, there are certain pieces that I'm just like, oh, that makes so much, that's who you are. So for me, it's hard to talk about this game in kind of like in a vacuum, just because it does connect so much more to the greater tapestry of the Legend of Heroes. So I'm having a blast with it. I'm really, really enjoying the story. And I'm really thankful that I'm getting the opportunity to finally get to know some of these characters more that I've already spent a bunch of time with. So I'm loving it so far.
Nice. Sounds like a home run if you're, a Trails fan already, I think. But for us, non-Trails people, Kevin, I feel like it's time for us to talk about this a little bit. Because, I think that there might be some people that look at this in the same way we looked at it, as like, maybe this is the point to jump in because it's only one game. It's not a time commitment of having to, dedicate 4 80-hour games worth to play the Trails of Cold Steel games. Or at least that's how I looked at it. But what did you think about the story as a first time player to this series?
So I'm mixed on the story for this game, to be honest. I like a lot about it. Don't get me wrong. The characters are phenomenal. I love the entire team. Lloyd, Ellie, Tio, Randy especially. I absolutely adore Randy. I think he's hilarious. I do think it takes quite a while to get to where it's going, and it leaves me wanting more, but also a little frustrated. Like the final chapter, which I won't say is so good that I'm like, why couldn't there be more to this game? Why do I have to wait for the next game? Especially after I felt like the first 4 chapters were kind of just trotting along at like one point in particular, I spent 2.5 hours just hitting the X button for dialogue boxes. And I was like, why couldn't we have more of what made the last chapter so good in the rest of the game? I do think the game can stand on its own to some degree. Like if as a first timer, I didn't feel like, oh, this wasn't satisfying to play. Like they didn't clarify enough things, but there are so many threads left open for me where I'm like, where do I go?
So can I actually ask a quick question? And without like actually getting into specifics, this series is notorious for absolutely massive cliffhangers at the very end of each game. I'm going to guess that there is another huge cliffhanger at the end of this game because there is the second part coming next year. So does it end does it end in a way that was satisfying, that you felt like, all right, like I had enough closure for the storyline of this game, or was it left like, oh man, I need the next one now? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's hard to answer.
Okay.
I will say that the main antagonist or so for this entry does get resolved.
Okay.
So if that's all you care about is wrapping up the stuff and seeing the consequences of what happens in this, I think you're okay. But there are lots of plot points for other characters that are introduced that clearly, if you look at, say, other games cover arts, maybe you'll be like, oh, we're clearly getting answers about those characters in future entries.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool.
Gotcha. Well, actually, Kevin, I actually wasn't expecting you to kind of have the same opinion as me with the story, but honestly, my opinion was pretty much dead on with what you talked about. Like, I had a really tough time with this game because it felt like the first couple chapters story-wise just felt like slow as molasses, and it was just so hard for me to get into this game. And maybe it was just, maybe I attributed it a little bit to like my mood, like maybe I wasn't in the mood for this type of game, but it just oh man, it felt like it just took so long to get going. But then, like as I got into chapter 3, I'm like, okay, like it's starting to move a bit. Like I'm actually getting into this. I feel like I don't want to put it down now, but oh crap, I'm like I have to record the review tomorrow with you guys, so I don't have enough runway to kind of get to the rest of this game that I feel is probably going to be much better as far as the story wise, and especially hearing you talk about the ending, Kevin, like the last chapter. I'm like, it gets me really excited to then go back after we're done talking about it here to play more of this game and get more into the story. But yeah, like I was really struggling with the story. And I think like, it's not so much I was struggling because I didn't, couldn't connect any of the characters to each other. To your point, Kevin, I think that the game does a good job standing on its own. And it does a good job of explaining things even if you haven't played any other games. So I never felt lost or anything like that, or felt like, I couldn't connect the dots with, a lot of the stuff the story was at least talking about in the section that I played. But it was more just like the pace of the story was so slow to start that that's a problem for me.
Can I ask you about the question? Did you guys play with like the fast forward mode on?
Yes.
Or are you playing with the fast forward mode on?
100%.
I actually didn't start with the fast forward.
Oh, right.
I played the first 2 hours of my experience not even touching the fast forward button.
Okay.
And I realized that was a mistake. Because like I should have been.
Yeah, because I've been like, I cranked the fast forward up. Like, this feature should be in like every JRPG moving forward in existence.
Agreed.
Like the fact that like you can control how much the speed goes up, both in like cutscenes on the field and in battle, to let you like customize that experience so that you can blow through. This is a 40 to 60 hour game playing at normal speed. But like it cuts it down a lot using that. So I find that interesting that you guys both felt like it was moving slow, because I'm enjoying the slow burn, which is what it feels like. And again, I wonder if that's just because I know a little bit more about the greater conflict, which is why I'm kind of waiting for it to get there. But I'm enjoying the ride so far. So I'm kind of surprised to hear you guys say that, but I can see where you're coming from at the same time.
So I did use it the entire time, and I finished the game in 20 hours. So it does cut down a lot. And I say that in my solo review, like shaves so many hours. I don't know if on PlayStation you can set to how fast though.
Yeah, you can't.
You can only hit one button and it goes high speed mode. So that's your only option for whatever speed that is. You can't change. You can't.
There's no option in the options.
No,
really. Okay, so the Steam Deck has or at least the Steam version has an option to change both like in battle and on field speed, and you can customize each speed. So for me, like I think it defaults to like ×2. I think like on field I have it to like ×4, and then in battle I have it to like ×3. So like, okay, that's I'm glad that we brought that up, because in the Steam version you can customize both on field and in battle to like I think like go to like a metric of like ×5.
No, we don't get that, and
I think it was just ×2.
I'm pretty sure it's ×2.
Interesting.
And you know what else really little nitpick here. There's no auto text feature, so you have to click the X button to progress dialogue. I can't just set my controller down and read it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, especially too, like I think they did that or didn't add anything like that to it because it was, since they didn't have English dialogue or anything like that, you're probably not following, the Japanese dialogue anyways. So I think that's why they didn't put the auto option in there, because likewise I don't know. It makes more sense to do auto when you're able to follow along with just the voice, I think, or at least that's the way developers, I think, look at it. Because I know a lot of games like this that just get an English translation but don't get English voices, usually don't have an auto dialogue option like that. Or at least that's just what I've noticed from a lot of other games that have been developed. So I think that might have been the thought process here. But also, again, that brings up a big point about this between the different versions. And that is, the PC version and Switch version, from what we've heard anecdotally, is actually, it has a lot of different, quality of life upgrades beyond just the time speed up mode that you talked about. Because even though the time speed up mode exists in both games, like the settings menu in the PlayStation 4 version is exactly the same as the PSP version with no changes. Whereas the PC version, it sounds like there's some tweaks there. Not only that, but Matt, when you were exploring the environment, you probably were able to like read the signs in the maps and stuff.
Yeah,
right.
Easily.
It didn't seem blurry or anything like that.
No, not at all.
Whereas on our version, like you could definitely tell it was the PSP textures just brought into the PS4 version, where if you look like when you first get to Crossbell and there's like the sign with like the Crossbell train station on it, like you can barely read the sign because it's all like blurry because it's like the PSP textures. Or there's like maps in town of like, you're here, but you can't read the map because it's just a blurry mess of shapes.
I ran into that a few times where it was like, go to this location. I was like, I don't know where that is. And I can't make out anything around. So I'm like zooming around town trying to figure out like, which direction is this? And for the most part, the game does give you like a good, like, oh, head east, head west. Like it tells you straight up.
Or it'll tell you what district you're in, and you can kind of figure it out from there.
But have you seen like the screenshots comparing the two versions? Because like the texture, like the ground, it's like way more detailed on the Switch and PC versions. Like you can have individual tiles, and on ours it's kind of just like blurred.
Yeah. I remember there was like an early quest in the prologue section of the game to go to the bakery, and there's like a building next door to it, and the building next door to it has like the name in like cursive writing, and it just looks like a squiggly mess. Like I can't even tell what the name of the building is just looking at it. So it's like I was definitely tougher, I think, especially with the side quests in particular, because the side quests, there's a ton of side quests in this game, but with the side quests specifically, they'll have reference buildings in town that you have to go to, I noticed. And a lot of those buildings, it's just like, well, I just found myself just entering each building in the district it told me to go to and just hoping I find the right building a lot of times, which is funny. But yeah, it sounds like there's probably a lot more tweaks behind under the hood as well. Matt, did you notice any other like things you could toggle in the PC version besides the high speed mode at all, or like anything that you think might be different?
There were a bunch of settings though, but like I honestly didn't really pay attention to them because I didn't think there would be any disparity between our versions in terms of the settings. But I can tell you at least that you can change the high speed settings to go even faster than what's default.
Okay, nice. Yeah, the high speed mode definitely, to your guys' point earlier as well. I'm very glad that was here, and like that's a feature I'd love to see more RPGs have, especially turn-based RPGs like this one. And I think, it helps with combat a little bit as well. But speaking of that, we should probably talk about the combat a little bit, because this is the part of the game that I actually liked, but I had some nitpicks here and there with it. But for the most part, I really enjoyed the combat. For the most part, it's a turn-based game, but whenever your players take turns, field placement, has a big part in the game. Because like any other strategy role-playing game, there's whenever you do attack or whenever you use a skill that depends on the position of your character, a grid appears in front of your character based on where they're able to move. So you have to make sure that your attack is within the range that your character can attack in, which is why like having a character like Ellie, who's a ranged character, is super helpful because she, can shoot the enemies with her guns. But for Lloyd or Randy, you really have to pay attention to their positions a lot. But Matt, how does the combat in this game compare to the other Trails games? Because I want to hear more about that.
So this one is much more in line with Trails in the Sky than it is Cold Steel. Cold Steel introduces a lot of Persona-esque elements, like social, like their version of social links, which again does change the way that the game is played, and depending on who you spend time with and so on and so forth, does affect the actual battles. This is very much more along the lines of Trails in the Sky. So that's it's more of kind of like your classic JRPG fare without all of the extra kind of put on top of it. I think this is probably one of my favorite versions of JRPG turn-based combat. I do think that the enigmas do need more explanation outside of just what's thrown at you, in the story. I'm sure there's more, in the detail, like in your journals and stuff that you could read up on. But like, there's one side quest specifically where you're told to use a certain piece of magic. And I had to look it up to figure out how to kind of slot things in, because you do have different gems that you can use, different quartz to kind of augment your characters, to make them faster, stronger, to make them, learn new skills. So it's nice that each character isn't really locked in to a certain type of build. You can mess with them a little bit. But I do think that section of it did need some more fleshing out, at least in terms of description, because then once you kind of figure it out, you kind of run with it. But I love this combat. I think it works super well. And I'm glad that in this game, it's at least so far, it seems to be, your 4 characters, and then do characters that come along kind of get added as support characters, which is nice because they can kind of just pop in and kind of help, the ebb and flow of battle. That isn't a system in Cold Steel, at least. And it wasn't, from what I remember, with in the Trails in the Sky either. So I do like that addition. I'm a little bit sad that got taken away, because again, especially in Trails of Cold Steel, your parties are, it's 4, but you have many more characters to kind of swap in and swap out. So it does differ later on, but it is pretty much in line with what Trails in the Sky is.
Yeah, that is weird that they had this feature and then took it away in previous games, to your point, especially because like this game in particular focuses so much more on just the 4 characters, that it's weird that this is the one that allows you to do that and not Trails of Cold Steel, which has a giant party of players that you have access to. So yeah, it's a little bit weird looking back on it in retrospect. But Kevin, as a newcomer to the series, what do you think about the combat?
This is my favorite part of the game. I think I love the combat system here. I think it holds up by today's modern standards. Like, you could throw this in a JRPG right now, and I would absolutely think it's phenomenal. The little grid, moving your characters to get within range, it's standard, JRPG fare. We've seen this a bunch of times. I think what really I enjoy is the S crafts or the combo crafts, where you like team up with another party member and get those phenomenal animations. I love watching. Like, I wasn't skipping them. I was like, I just love watching these. These are so cool. I do think that some moves aren't as useful as, like, I barely used magic in this game, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, I just did not.
Really?
Yeah. Every time I tried to use magic, I'm just like, I could do more if I just ran up and like hit them or used like I don't know, a craft. I just felt like magic was very underpowered for me in this game. I don't know if I was like, to your point, the court system, I don't think was explained well to me at all. It was very much like, you can put gems in here and they give you like stat bonuses. And I would just like, okay, I got HP 1. And then later on in the game, I'd be like, all right, HP 3 is going in the slot. HP 1 went in, and like, I never really felt like, how am I supposed to be speccing out the characters? Like, are certain characters going to benefit more from certain courts? It was not really a well-defined system for me. I just upgraded and then kept putting better courts in to replace the old ones. So it made you more powerful, but I don't know. I like the combat. I didn't have an issue with it. I only lost a handful of times on like some boss fights, but nothing too stressful for me.
Yeah, I don't think the difficulty curve is too steep or anything like that. I think like the combat is well balanced, like especially just playing on normal difficulty. I felt like it was, I never felt like I was, disadvantaged or I had like a tough time with any of the enemies. But I will agree with you about the magic, Kevin, because I actually was in the same boat, believe it or not, Matt, because I felt like the fact that magic specifically slowed down your character because you had to spend the time casting, the payoff wasn't worth doing that versus doing attacks, because sometimes in the time it would take a character to do a magic attack, you might get one or two more attacks off in that time frame, and then you actually end up doing more damage, because even though, let's say you're attacking for 43 each time, but the magic spell does 120, well, if you get 3 attacks in that window instead of waiting for the one magic spell, you're doing more damage that day.
So what I will say there is that like there are certain enemies that like, especially like, I don't know if you guys were using analyze a lot. Like I would analyze pretty much every single enemy, and there are some enemies that like the magic scales incredibly differently depending on the enemy you're using against, depending on the element that you're using against certain enemies. And those, if there's like an enemy that has like 200, weakness towards a certain type of magic, I will abuse that magic. Like I'll have points where I have like all 4 members casting at the same time, because physical does next to nothing against certain enemies, and then you're left using the magic. And I will say with the court system, for anybody who's thinking about kind of jumping in, the way that it essentially works is that depending on which courts that you're slotting into which slots, they give different values on the bottom, and depending on the values how they stack, they unlock new spells for the characters to use. And some of those, some of those stacked spells do absolutely monstrous, huge damage across the board, especially even with healing. You get massive like party heals, which the items don't give you. And the one thing that I will say about the court system as well, I've already done it once in Trails from Zero, but Cold Steel especially, there was multiple times where once you get in a flow of impede, like stacking impedes, especially the strong ones, along with delays, there's a boss that I fought in this game already that literally did not move once because of how I spec'd the characters to completely continue to delay his attacks further and further down the line. And he didn't touch me once. And that's a running thing in this series, that if you take the time to really dig into that system, you can almost break it, because there are certain enemies that will not touch you because of how quickly your characters can move. Beat them to their attacks, stop them from casting any magic, and then they're just left sitting there as you completely pummel them into the dirt. So that's the one thing.
Actually something I noticed too, Matt. Like it wasn't really until a battle I just did maybe 15 minutes before we recorded this. I was like, I ended up using a move that would like delay their turn, delay their speed by 3, which then would slow them down so much that they just couldn't even attack in battle.
Yep. And especially like one of Randy's moves that you get, like the flashbang move, will blind enemies, and then they'll come try to attack you, miss, and then you just completely punish them with like the like opportunity attacks basically. And again, like there are so many, that's what I love about the Legend of Heroes as a whole, because this is in pretty much every game. You can spec these characters in such ways that you'll just absolutely decimate everything around you. Now, the boss I just fought, I literally took every last bit of healing items that I had to stay alive, because some of the boss fights I think can be tough. But again, if you figure it out, it's really, really fun to break these systems apart, because the game totally lets you do it.
I forgot I had healing items until like the final boss when I really needed them. I was just using Ellie, and then I learned Tio had a heal move too, and I was like, when did you get this? I don't even know. But I wish I had invested more in impede and stuff now, because I didn't do any of that. I was really just focused on like, how do I make my character stronger, have more health, and less about like status effects. So I did want to say, there's like a sweet all-out attack type thing in this game. I love that. That's fantastic. Like when you because it kind of works like the Tales series, right? Where you like wandering around the overworld, and then you can attack them and stun them, and then it goes into a separate little battle area. And if you get the advantage attack, then you can usually do the like all your party members attack them, and that was really cool to see.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of Persona in that way, but you know, the way that you get to the all-out attack was very different than that. But yeah, I always enjoyed seeing that animation. But like one of the things I loved, to your point about that, and then the spell animations, I think just the animations in general in this game look really great. Like I think even though, you know, the version that we played was pretty much just a straight port of the PSP version, I do think visually wise, besides, you know, the blurry textures and maps and signs and stuff like that, I think that this is actually still like a good looking game that still holds up really well visually.
Yeah, I agree.
And now I'm just like kind of kicking myself because I'm like, I kind of wish I played it on Switch or PC instead. Because I do think, I think there's enough of a difference there, visually speaking, to maybe warrant that, I think. I think like on Steam Deck, Matt, it sounds like it looks really good.
It looks crisp. It looks clean. Like I have no problem reading any of the signs. Like I'll literally like wander around and go up to the bus signs and be like, where is this one going? Read the bus signs, move on. Like I've had no graphical issues whatsoever.
I couldn't even tell if there was text on the bus sign. That's how crazy it's on that version.
Braille up there. I do think the character art, especially when you meet like a new side character and you get like the full character art on the screen to like, hi, I don't want to say any of the side characters, but I love the way this game looks. Like I have no problem with even playing the PS4 version. I think it holds up really well, like Ryan was saying.
Yeah. Exactly. Like even though, you know, I have, you know, nitpicks about the visuals on the PlayStation 4 version, I still think it's serviceable and definitely looks good. But yeah, you are going to have more trouble with, you know, some of the quests and stuff like that as well. And likewise, I don't really love a lot of the menuing that's in this version as well. Like going to that like cross menu to then go to your detective book and stuff like that. It always felt like I was trying to have to constantly remind myself of which button gets myself to the main menu versus which menu gets myself to the cross menu to then get to the like the logbook and stuff like that. And likewise, you know, the logbooks just kind of becomes kind of a mess after a while whenever you know stockpile quests and stuff too. So I wish they played around with some of the menuing a little bit in this game to just make it a little more user friendly to navigate, I think.
Yeah, because at its core, it is like a 12-year-old game at this point, right? That they just kind of, again, they up-res a little bit, they fix some things, and it sounds like the PlayStation version, they fix less than others. But yeah, there are kind of wear and tear things that just you don't see. There's quality of life stuff that you just don't see like much anymore because JRPGs by and large have figured this stuff out by now. But it does show its age a little bit in its menu specifically. I do agree at that point.
I will say I do like how detailed the journal is, or your detective journal, right? Like the amount of times I would pop that open and just be like, all right, what was I doing? Like, where do I need to go? Like, it's a very good tool, especially when I think some of the quests in this game are pretty like, how do you progress? And it's like, oh, you have to talk to these random 4 people scattered throughout town. Like, how would I ever know to talk to them? Yeah, it comes in handy for sure.
Yeah, it definitely helps you because you're right. Like a lot of older RPGs, especially of this era or earlier, wouldn't have something like this in the menus, and you would be expected to remember from dialogue, oh, they told me to go talk to people in town, and you'd expect to remember that information. Or likewise, you know, I feel like it's a good tool as well. Like if you put down the game for a while and come back to it, like you can be like, oh, this is what I was doing. And it even highlights, you know, what the main story quest is in your logbook too, which is nice. Which, again, all of this shouldn't be, you know, news to anyone who's used to modern games. But again, for us who have replaying an old game like this, I think it's definitely good that an old game has this stuff because you don't always get this with older RPGs. But yeah, all in all, I think for the most part, it sounds like we like this game a lot. So I think we should kind of move towards our verdict on the game. So first off, you know, Matt being the Trails fan here. First of all, do you think that this game's worth a pickup, worth a look at? You really enjoying it? Or likewise, is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you wanted to mention before we kind of wrap things up?
What I will say about this game is that like I genuinely think this is one series that's worth investing your time in if you do like JRPGs. Like it really is a massive sprawling thing where each piece of the puzzle feels as important as the other. if you're curious, I would tell you to start with Trails in the Sky, because just by the very nature of like the little moments in this game, it will spoil things for you. Now, I don't think that takes away from the quality of the series or the games as themselves, because again, like Crossbell for me is a place I've already visited in another game. I'm familiar with some of these characters, but just seeing how all of this comes together and seeing where all of these things had started for me, like again, I was ready to play like a fan translation of this, and then this game got announced, just because of how important all of these pieces are into one another. So I do think the series as a whole is an incredibly, incredibly good, often overlooked JRPG series that I think is worth a lot of people's time. Trails from Zero, I think, is a fine place to kind of start with the game, start with the series as a whole. I would recommend going with Trails in the Sky first, but you really can't go wrong with Zero. This game is really great, and by all accounts, Trails to Azure, which is the follow up, is considered to be one of the best Legend of Heroes games. So we're in for a treat when the second one hits. But yeah, I love this game. I'm very, very, very happy that it's finally in our hands. I cannot wait for the sequel as well. And yeah, I think this is a fantastic JRPG for people who are looking for something new. And again, just the way that the series evolves, and just it goes to just some really dark and weird places sometimes. But I love the series. It's one of my favorites.
Nice. Well, and just to note about, Trails in the Sky, I mean, I know just a lot of people haven't picked that one up at all because it is so hard to get, because the physical copy is like super expensive, and then you can get it on Vita.
It's on Steam.
But not everyone has it on Vita. Oh, yes, it is on Steam.
Yeah, Trails in the Sky is on Steam. Yeah.
I always forget that PC is actually a platform you can play games on that. I don't know if you knew this. So moving on to you, Kevin, as the new person to the series. Same question. Final thoughts, overall thoughts. What would you recommend this game to new players? And again, anything we didn't touch on yet that you want to touch on?
I think we've covered everything. I really do just want to stress, like, for me, the best part of this game was the characters, not even the main party. The side characters you meet too are absolutely phenomenal. Mm-hmm. And I imagine they come back in further entries, or maybe they're in other games. Like, I know, Matt, you said Estelle and Joshua from the Bracers Guild are in other games. I loved them. I was like, man, I want more of them. So that makes me like want to go play some of the other Trails games. And that's kind of where I'm landing. Is I think this game holds up very well. I think it's good, and for the price point, I think you can get a lot of enjoyment out of it. Like, if you bought it, I don't think you would be disappointed. I think there's a lot of enjoyment here. I do think that if you aren't willing to read a few hours, like an hour, maybe two of text here and there, then this might not be for you. Like, if you really aren't looking for that kind of exposition a lot, then...
Plus, it is a commitment as well, because you can't save while you're reading text.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So
yes.
You do have to commit like an hour or two to just reading the text, to your point.
So if that doesn't sound appealing for you, probably not your type of game. But for me, like I said, I would like to play Trails to Azure. Knowing where this game ends, I would like to continue to see that through. I don't know if I would go out and buy the other Trails games right now at full price. For me, I don't think I'm there yet. I think I need a little more, but if they're on sale,
Trails in the Sky 1, 2, and 3 are all on sale on Steam right now. The first one's $10.
Oh, okay. See, that sounds reasonable. So for me, I am open to more Trails games when I have the time. I don't know if right now is specifically the time, especially, and 2023 looks stacked. So it really is a time thing, but I'm open to it, and I probably will play more of the series for sure.
Nice. Yeah. As for me, I really enjoyed this one a lot. I do think, there are some, nitpicks that I have with the game, but all in all, I think it holds up pretty well for, a 12-year-old PSP game that we're playing on our TVs, in 2022. But, it's just one of those things where I don't know if the game so far has done enough to want to win me over to play other, games in the series. But to the point I made earlier, I haven't finished the game yet. I'm maybe 60% of the way through the game. So
when you play the final chapter, let me know.
Yeah. Like when I get towards the end of the game, I might feel the same way that Kevin does a little bit about it. So I don't know if I'm lining up to play the other games yet, but I do think like what we talked about earlier, I think this might be a good entry if you don't have a PC to play Trails in the Sky and you only have a PlayStation 4 or a Switch, like if you don't play PC games at all, then I do think like this might actually be a good gateway into it versus something like Cold Steel because of the time commitment that you have to put into playing the Cold Steel games. I think is the bigger down, like hurdle to jump into those games with. So yeah, I agree. I think this might actually be a good place to start for if you're new to the Trails games as well, if you don't want to play Trails in the Sky on PC. But I will say though, you know, knowing what we talked about here, like if you have a Switch or a PC, just get the game on those platforms rather than PlayStation. I think like it's still fine to play on PlayStation, but it's the platform that I would least recommend this game on after everything we've talked about here. Like it just sounds like the improvements, even just to the speed adjustments or the visual, you know, improvements, I think are enough to warrant playing the game on those platforms versus PlayStation. But if PlayStation's all you got, I still think you're going to have probably a good time with this game. But anyways, I think that's going to wrap up this conversation about Trails from Zero. But before we go, Kevin, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, great conversation. Thank you guys for having me over on Carpool Gaming. Always love the collabs we do. But you can find me over at the Muffin Mon on Twitter. That's a 1 and 7 I and O and 7 A. You can find my podcast network, Save the Game Media, at Save Game Media on Twitter, Save the Game Media over on YouTube. We have podcasts literally every day, Patreon exclusive shows. Come on over, hang out. It's a good time, growing community. We would love to have you.
He's not kidding. Literally podcasts every day or just shorts. Like, I don't know who's churning out the shorts on your channel, Kevin. Literally, like, I think there's like 2 or 3 of those a day over there.
That's me.
Dude,
that's me.
There's so many. Oh my God. And Matt, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me over on Twitter at burnout_Matt. You can find me each and every week on youtube.com/burnoutbrighter. And of course, come check out the PlayStation Drive if you are, for some reason, not watching that yet and you're watching this. Come check us out. Me and Court do all things PlayStation every week. It's where Ryan used to be. Tear. I miss him every time.
Well, you got the Supreme Court of Canada.
I do, and it's going wonderfully, but I still miss you, Ryan.
I know. Yeah, please. You know, we would probably just sit there and talk about our JRPGs for like 30 minutes on that show, especially with all the JRPGs coming out over the next week.
Dude, all those Yakuza announcements, Court's in for a ride this week. Let's go.
Oh my God. As for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turfer. You also find us on Twitter at Carpool Gaming, on YouTube at youtube.com/Carpool Gaming, on podcast services around the globe. So for Kevin Ainsworth and Matt Sawinski, I'm Ryan Turfer. This has been the extra level of the RPG Cave, and we're out. Bye-bye.